Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We're continuing on Masechet Makkot, and we're on Daf Chaf, Amud Bet, about 4 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. We really got to Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph, but we're going to go back to do a quick review. Today's Amud is being learned as a schut for Refuah Shalema of Rachel Simcha Bat Nahit. That should have full recovery, Refuah Shalema Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This week's learnings of the community has been dedicated graciously by the Kohen family, by Dayan family, by Shei families. Should be an ultimate schut for all of their mishpachot. Amen. So we started the question of seret lanefesh. Not only it is prohibited, it's asur to make bald spots on your head, pulling out hair in anguish of a deceased, but it's also asur to cut yourself, seret lanefesh, which we understood, the Gemara explained, also is a prohibition against the mourning in an unusual way, cutting yourself, scratching yourself, going crazy on a loss of a friend, of a family member. Well, don't take that too seriously just yet until we get to it. So the Gemara says, Seret lanefesh. What's the question? What the question the Gemara asks is, what's the scenario if you have 5 different cuts on one deceased, or 1 cut on 5 different deaths that you hear about, and in anguish of all, combination of all the people who you knew that now passed, you make 1 cut on your body. What's going to be? Is it going to be 1 isur, or is it going to be 5 different isurim? So says the Gemara, first and foremost, the Gemara says, what happens if I'm upset because the house went down, or the ship sunk, other anguish, and the Gemara says, no, you're not mehuyav. Not necessarily the best thing to do, but you don't get a hiyuv for cutting yourself in anguish of other catastrophes that happen, only for a dead person. The Gemara is going to challenge that in just a moment, but the Gemara says, where do I see that? From the pasuk that says, seret lanefesh, cutting for a soul. This is what the Gemara is going to challenge in just a moment. Eno hayav el alamet, only for a soul that was lost on death of a deceased. That's when you're hayav bilvad. How do I know if you make 5 cuts on 1 death, or the reverse? So the Gemara goes through them one by one. How do I know 5 cuts on 1 person, you get 5 separate chiyuvim? Shu chayav al kol achat va'achat, Talmud lomar v'seret. It says it in singular form to tell you every single one of the cuts that you make, you are chayav separately. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi said, Minai lemesaretz ritachat al hamesh metim. How do you know if you make 1 single cut, but that was initiated because of 5 different people who died, that you're still going to be chayav 5? That's a much bigger chidush. So says the Gemara, Talmud lomar lanefesh, seret lanefesh, that every single one of this, it's singular, to say every single nefesh by itself obligates you 1 chiyuv. Now what's the obvious question? Just 30 seconds ago, you used the same word lanefesh to tell me only for a soul you get chayav, but not for your ship that sunk or for your house that got destroyed. La nefesh, only for that. So you can't use the same word in the pasuk for 2 different separate halachot. You can't do that. So how in the world is a kasha on Rabbi Yossi? How in the world does Rabbi Yossi know that when you did 1 cut on 5 people, you get 5 different chiyuvim? You can't learn that from nefesh, because nefesh I need to learn that only for death you get hayav, not for other anguish and other catastrophes. So says the Gemara, very good question. Rabbi Yossi has a very specific shita. The Gemara says, Kasavar, top line, Rabbi Yossi, srita v'kitita achati. Rabbi Yossi holds that the 2 prohibitions in the Torah of seret lanefesh lo titenu and also lo titgodedu are one and the same. Because the pasuk says, lo titgod banim atem laHashem Elokechem. We just had this pasuk re'eh. Banim atem laHashem Elokechem, lo titgodedu. How do you translate lo titgodedu? Means don't cut yourselves. So seret lanefesh lo titenu, don't cut yourselves. Lo titgodedu, don't cut yourselves. Different languages mentioned in the Chumash, but Rabbi Yossi holds they are one and the same. So if they are one and the same, guess what it says by lo titgodedu? It says, I read the whole pasuk from the side. Bani matem laHashem Elokechem, your children to Hashem, lo titgodedu, don't cut yourselves. Velo tasimu korcha ben enechem, and do not make bald spots on your head. Lamet, for a dead person, for a dead person. Don't do it as an anguish of mourning a dead. So he already says, for a dead person, I don't need the word lanefesh. So lanefesh is empty, is extra. I could learn from lanefesh that for every single nefesh v'nefesh, you get the chiyuv, and that's the shita of Rabbi Yossi. Amazing. Says the Gemara, wait a second. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, "Hamisaret b'kli chayav." If you cut yourself with a kli, with a tool, like many goyim do with machetes, and they do in their mourning, they cut them even today. Like, we just had it a few weeks ago. Many people die every year. Many people get hospitalized. Still do this. This is something that, again, Rambam writes this in Chod Avodah Zarah. He feels that this was part of the minhag of the Avodah Zarah, but this was something that the people did for mourning the dead as well, and the Torah prohibits it. So says Shmuel, if you cut yourself with your hand, you get one isur. If you cut yourself with a kli, with a knife, with whatever tool you use, then you get two isurim. You get two separate lavin, two sets of malkut. So it says, wait a second. How's that work? You can't say that in Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi says, Srita v'gedida is haynuach, is mamash the same thing. They're not different at all. It's just two different forms of the same exact isur. Shmuel apparently doesn't hold that, because Shmuel holds you do it with hand is one isur, you do it with kli is an additional isur. It's two different. You get two sets of malkut for it. So that doesn't go together with what we just learned in Rabbi Yossi. Says the Gemara, Metive. They asked in the Bet Midrash a question, Srita v'gedida achati. This that we just said before, that the isur of lo tisretu saratet or seret lanefesh lo titenu is the same, one and the same with the isur of lo titkodedu. So how can you get two different isurim for it? Ela shesrita beyad v'gedida bekli. The only difference is one of them is with hand, one of them is with a kli, with a vessel. But they are mamash the same. You can't get two different isurim for them. Says the Gemara, who the Amar ki Rabbi Yossi. This is like Rabbi Yossi. The Rabbi Yossi holds mamash, they are the same thing. But Shmuel's halacha goes that there are two different isurim. One of them is specifically with hand, and one of them is specifically with the kli. So therefore, if you do with the kli, you are now liable for two different chiyuvim, two different obligations. So says the Gemara, Tani Tanaka bet Rabbi Yochanan. An Amora learned in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Almet ben beyad ben bekeli. If you do a cut on a deceased in anguish of death of a loved one, then whether you do it with your hand or you do it with a kli, you're going to be liable, you're going to be hayav. So says the Gemara, al avodat kochavim, but if you do it in process of avodah zarah, as we mentioned, Rambam understood that this was something that avodah zarah did, like, and we'll quote the pasuk to this effect in just a moment. על עבודת כוכבים, ביד חייב בכלי פטור. You're only חייב if you do it with your hand. If you do it with a vessel, if you do it with a knife, or if you do it with a sword, you gotta be patur. So Gemara says, wait a second. That doesn't stem what we learned in the pasuk, right? For all the Tanakh gurus, right? You don't really have to be a Tanakh guru for this one, because this is one of the highlights of Sefer Melachim Aleph, Perek Yutet, the story of Eliyahu Ba'ara Carmel. What was the whole story? They had a contest of whose korban is going to be accepted, and they brought two identical cows, two identical mizbahot, and so on and so forth. And Eliyahu Navi tells them, he says, you're the Rabbi, Mahara Rabbim Latod, you go first, right? And there in the morning, the whole entire assembly of Klal Yisrael is present on top of Har Carmel, and they start davening to this massive piece of debris, Baal, and they're davening and they're dancing and they're jumping and nothing. Right? The truth is, they had the cousin of the king, right, was appointed to be under the mizbeach to light the fire there, to make belief that this is a fire that came, but a snake took care of him, and he went to the heavens, but so it was nothing, en oneh ve'en kashev, nothing. And what happens? They started hitting themselves with haravot, with swords, and blood was all over the place. So that was one of the, you see from the pasuk, that was one of the methods of avodah zarah. It was one of the methods of avodah zarah that they had. But you see that was with a kli, not with a hand. So if the Torah is prohibiting something against avodah zarah, it should be what they used to do, that the Torah is prohibiting. So there's what it says, ve'ha'ifchaktiv. It says exactly fakert. It says the opposite in the pasuk. Va'itkodedu kemishpatam, that they started cutting themselves like they used to, becharavot ubermachim. It's hard to imagine this, like, with swords and with spears, right? Ela'ema beyat patur bekli chayav. It's exactly the opposite. That with your hands you are patur, with a kli you are chayav. So says the Gemara. So that's as far as that goes. But now, one question. We're cutting short because of slihot, the time of Amud Yomi. But at least one question is very important. We find in the Gemara, in Masechet Sanhedrin, story from Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's one of the main rabbis of Rabbi Akiva was Rabbi Eliezer Agadol, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, right? Very much relating to Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus also was an ignorant individual until the age of 28. If you study, very worthwhile studying the first Perek of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, it says the whole history, how his father was a billionaire and he was working together with the family, with the brothers and so on, and he was depressed that he didn't know Torah, and he was not eating and so on, and his father said, what's with you? He said, I want to learn Torah. And he said, go work, become a billionaire, your children, support your children in Kolil, right? You've heard that before. He says, no, I want to become a Talmid Chacham myself. And he goes, long story, he goes to Shalayim, he goes to Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. He wanted to learn. And long story. He worked really hard. He became a massive Talmid Chacham. He started from scratch, mamash from scratch, right? So he connected with Rabbi Akiva in that way. He was one of the primary rebbeim of Rabbi Akiva, but we already have learned the story of Tanur Achnai in Baba Metzia Daf Nun Tet Amud Aleph, that he became a shamuti because of a debate that he had with Hachabim. He was put in harem, and his Talmidim were not allowed to necessarily be very close with him. The 4 amot away, he never retracted his psak, so the harem was never taken. A very sad story. So the Gemara there discusses his last moments. When he was on his deathbed, his former students all heard about it, and they all came flocking to his house to be with the Rebbe in the last moments. And he said, where have you been? And they all, that's the ultimate uncomfortable question. Like, everyone started saying, busy, this, that, the other, right? And Rabbi Eliezer, we see in the Gemara in Masechet Ta'anit, Rabbi Eliezer was makpid, he was a very specific person, right? We had the story of when there was a drought, and Rabbi Eliezer went down to the Amud, he davened 24 brachot, nothing. And Rabbi Akiva goes down, he's Talmud, and he says 2 sentences, Avinu Malkenu, boom, starts raining. And people were meranin, people were saying, he's bigger than him. And Bat Kol comes and says, no. Rabbi Eliezer also got a lot of Bat Kols in his kavod, because Hashem loved him. Not because he's greater, but because Zeh ma'avir al midotav, v'zeh eno ma'avir al midotav. Rabbi Akiva is easygoing. He forgives, he forgets, he forgoes. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't. That's why I forgive and forgo and forget about your averot when he davens, right? But nevertheless, Rabbi Eliezer says, I will be surprised if any of you would die a natural death because you disrespected your Rebbe. And Rabbi Akiva says, how about me? That was a mistake. And says Rabbi Eliezer, Shelcha kashem mishel kulam. Yours is going to be worse than all of them. Shelibcha patuach keulam, because you're the smartest one. You know how much you could have learned from me, and you didn't. We all know what the Gemara says in Samach Gimel in Masechet Brachot of what happened to Rabbi Akiva. But nevertheless, the Gemara there says that day he passed away. Rabbi Eliezer passed away, and Rabbi Akiva, in eulogizing him, he went crazy. He was hitting himself, he was scratching himself, blood was all over the place, and he would say, Avi, Avi, Rechev Yisrael, borrow the language of actually the same, it's the same place in Melachim Aleph, 2 chapters afterwards, when Eliyahu Navi left. He says, Avi, Avi, Rechev Yisrael, you're the chariot of the Jewish nation. Kama, he says, I have so much money, I'm like a person that has a lot of coins. I don't have a bank to go exchange the coins. I lost my bank. I have all these questions. I have all this Torah that I want to learn, and you're no longer there. So Tosafot there asked the obvious question. So, wait a second. How can you do this? How in the world can you be cutting yourself and doing all these things that the Gemara over here says he can't do? So you talk about the Isur D'Oraita over here. So it says the Tosafot, the reason is because there he was not mourning a person, a loss of a person. He was mourning the loss of the Torah. He was sad not because the Rabbi Eliezer as a person that he was lost, but he would be more than happy if he had somebody else like Rabbi Eliezer. Well, he was sad that his Rebbe passed away, but the mourning was the mourning of the Torah, and that is not included in this. Now, this is actually very interesting because this gives you an answer to a question that the Minchat Chinuch asks in I think it's Siman Shin Samech Zayin. There he asks the following question. He says, how about if a person is not your direct relative that passed away, but it was a relative of a relative or a friend that passed away? Do you still have the Isur of bald spot or cutting yourself, or do you not have it? Maybe it's only, for someone that the direct relative, one of the 7 relatives, and so on. So from this Tosafot, you could see that doesn't make a difference. Even on your Rebbe, on someone that's not related to you, you still would have the obligation if you would be doing it on their death, because otherwise the whole question of the Tosafot wouldn't even start. It would be dead on arrival. So therefore, you see that the Isur is applicable to everybody. Any person that you love and in anguish of their death, you will be doing this. It would be considered the Isur D'Oraita. It doesn't have to be your direct relative and so on, but nevertheless, we also see the leniency that Tosafot mentions in case of Rabbi Akiva. Chazak u'baruch.